See. Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another topical, timely, and critically important AMET webinar. Today is let me make sure. Today is day 300 of the Iranian-backed war against the state of Israel, which we at AMET see as being on the front lines of the protection of Western civilization. Yesterday, we all woke up um, um, to the dramatic news that with a precision missile strike, Israel had eliminated the Hamas chieftain Ismael Haniya. This was as he was a guest in the inauguration of the incoming President Masoud Pezeshkian in Tehran. On July 13th, the IDF also took out Mohammed Deif in an airstrike over Khan Yunis, Gaza. The leadership of Hamas is dwindling. This should leave Yahya Sinwar shivering in a tunnel somewhere beneath Gaza, or perhaps in Egypt somewhere. This was just a brief 12 hours after Israel eliminated the Hamas strongman Fuad Shukr. Fuad Shukr is also known as Al-Hajj and Mohsen Shukr in Beirut, Lebanon. Fuad Shukr was the individual responsible for the heinous attack on the town of Mejdal Shams, which killed 12 children and teenagers in this Druze town on Israel's northern border with Syria. He was also responsible for the murder of 241 U.S. servicemen sleeping in a Marine barracks in October 1983. The U.S. had a $5 million bounty on his head. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khameini are irate that a quote guest of theirs was killed in an inauguration ceremony in Tehran in an IRGC safe house. On Wednesday morning, in a meeting of the Supreme National Security Council, Khamenei gave the order to attack Israel. The supreme leader issued a tweet saying, quote, following the bitter, tragic event which took place on our borders of the Islamic Republic, it is our duty to exact revenge. Here to discuss these dramatic developments is David Shanker. David served as Undersecretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs during the Trump administration from 2019 to 2021. In that capacity, he was the principal Middle East advisor to the Secretary of State and the senior official overseeing the conduct of U.S. policy and diplomacy in a region stretching all the way from Morocco to Iran to Yemen. His responsibility was for 18 countries, the Palestinian Authority, and Western Sahara. He also supervised more than 9,000 staff and administered an annual budget in excess of $7 billion. In policy terms, David led the Bureau's efforts to advance American interests abroad and strengthen U.S. partnerships and alliances across the region. Via diplomacy and the effective allocation of resources and assistance, as well as through the imposition of sanctions, David has worked to promote human rights, deter terrorism, fight corruption, and push back against regional adversaries. In addition to developing and implementing the U.S. strategy on China in the region, he worked to heal the Gulf Rift between Qatar and their neighboring Gulf states. He also resolved intractable conflicts in Libya and Yemen, consolidate the Abraham Accords, and counter malign Iranian influences in the Middle East. David is also the Taub Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and director of the Linda and Tony Rubin program on Arab politics. And he's written many, many monographs that are brilliant. David, the first question, it appears that the White House is reluctant for this to widen into a regional war. Is it too late for that?
Well, hi, Sarah. It's good to be with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very, very well.
Great. Well, No, I don't think it's too late. I mean, we did have, the Fuad Shukr assassination, Ismael Haniya, um, in Tehran, which of course was an enormous embarrassment to the theocracy to have their guest not being able to protect their guest. Um, and I think we've seen the red flags flying. This is the promise of revenge and retaliation. I think that it's all but certain there will be significant retaliation, whether from Iran, certainly from Hezbollah after losing their top military commander in Fuad Shukr. Um, and yet, I think the fundamental dynamic remains that neither Israel nor Hezbollah nor Iran actually want a full-scale war. Uh, Hezbollah not be the decider here, maybe Tehran, but that's because really, the purpose of Hezbollah is not to quote unquote liberate Lebanese territory. It is to defend Tehran, to defend the regime against Israeli strikes, to defend the regime's nuclear program. They don't want to squander this resource on Palestinians. It's not like the Hashd-Shabi in Iraq or the Houthis in Yemen. It's something entirely different. This is a strategic asset that they want to preserve for the time and need. And we saw after 2006, the 34-day war between Israel and Hezbollah, that while Hezbollah was still firing, 100 rockets and missiles a day at Israel, that much of the organization's capability was degraded, and it took 5, maybe 6 years for the organization to reconstitute, rearm, and get their capabilities up to the point where they are, today, basically. So that said, if the retaliation is significant, we will see tomorrow, the next day, and the next coming days, what Hezbollah does, that could result in a spiraling escalation that leads to a full-scale war. But there still is, potentially room for diplomacy, and we can talk more about what's on the table in that regard. But today we saw, I think it was Al Akhbar, Hezbollah's hometown newspaper in Lebanon, where they went after Amos Hochstein, the embassy, the administration's Lebanon envoy or energy envoy who does all the Lebanon negotiations, looking to discredit him for his role to date. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Oh, what
Okay,
now? Okay, okay. So, what now are the prospects of the return of the 115 or so hostages? That was one of the goals of this war that Prime Minister Netanyahu had laid out. How does this act influence these prospects?
Yeah, well, contrary to what several leading newspapers have written about being Ismael Haniya being the moderate in Hamas and pragmatist, nonetheless, he was responsible in large part for being the face of the negotiations. You now have a temporary or an acting head of Hamas externally. I still think Sinwar is the decider in Gaza, whether this complicates communications or um, uh, makes Hamas even more reticent to engage in discussions about a ceasefire. I think that certainly is one possible outcome. I think that this may set it back, and of course, sadly, I think we're talking about 115 or 120 Israeli hostages. I think the number of unfortunately, of living hostages is, a fraction of that. But nonetheless, I think this probably sets back the timing of a deal. The calculations may be the same for Hamas, which is essentially that their forces have been degraded, that we read about internal pressures within Hamas from the cadres to move forward with an agreement so they can get some relief or survive. And yet, I think that this will probably cause Sinwar to dig in. And of course, Hamas has wanted all from the very beginning for the conflict to broaden. I think Sinwar, many Hamas leaders expressed sadness and disappointment from day one that Hezbollah, that their involvement was rather limited and performative, relatively speaking. They wanted a full-scale war with all the regional proxies joining. And this assassination, which I think Israel accomplishing, showing tremendous, I think, tactical intelligence and operational prowess, and also following through on their pledge to, like Munich, to assassinate all the senior Hamas leadership in the aftermath of October 7th. I think at the same time that Hamas may get ultimately what it wants if this conflict broadens with both Iran and Hezbollah.
How does this reflect on Israel's relationship with Qatar, which harbored Ismael Haniya, and who, by the way, amassed a fortune of $14 billion? How has Qatar responded to all of this?
Well, I've not seen a lot. I saw a report suggesting earlier today that the Qataris had some degree of intelligence that there was an assassination plot on Haniya. But of course, this is something that everyone knew. The Israelis had committed themselves to killing Haniya. They will kill Sinwar. They'll go after Abu Marzouk, etc. These people are not destined for long lives, I don't think. But listen, the issue with Qatar, Israel has a long-standing relationship that precedes, they're of course not an Abraham Accords country, obviously, but they long had relations and dealings with Qatar Trade Office, right after the Oslo Accords, the connections, communications with the Qataris. And up to 3 months before October 7th, the Prime Minister of Israel continued to ask the Qataris to fund Hamas, essentially, to underwrite the expenses in Gaza. Relations have deteriorated since, obviously, between Israel and Qatar, and certainly at the public level. But this was, I think, a convenient arrangement for many to have Hamas be in Qatar. But for Israel to have, this also, I think, insulated the Hamas leadership from assassination. But the problem is when you travel abroad to places like Iran or elsewhere in the region, you are not immune from the long arm of Israel. So I think that we'll probably see some statements coming out of Qatar, but it'll probably be rather muted.
David, you worked very, very hard, although somewhat behind the scenes, when you were with the Trump administration to negotiate the Abraham Accords. Have you heard any response from the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, or Morocco to this?
Well, I've been traveling in recent days. I've spoken to people in Lebanon. I've spoken to people in Israel. I imagine what we're going to hear from the Emirates or people in the Emirates at the senior levels is an appreciation for Israel's operational capabilities, something that will be, I think, reassuring to many of the leadership of these countries that Israel not only has these capabilities, but is willing to use them. I think we've seen in recent years, looking at how Israel responded to provocation, and this is before October 7th, but a provocation from Hezbollah in particular, the responses from Israel were so measured, so proportionate. After the roadside bomb in Megiddo that Hezbollah planted, killed an Arab Israeli, 15, 20 kilometers into Israel, this wasn't a border incident. And the response was so proportional, calculated, measured, to signal that Israel in no way wanted to move up the escalatory ladder. And the list is long, whether you talk about the response to Hezbollah putting tents on Israel side of the border, to firing anti-tank weapons, sending drones, etc. I think these responses I think contributed to a real erosion of Israeli deterrence, and ultimately, resulted in eroded deterrence and a poor, a poor outcome. Whether this was October 7th, a belief that either Israel wasn't operationally prepared or willing to respond in ways that raise the cost to such a degree on its adversaries that it almost, in a way, invited adventurism and and what turned out to be a horrific event on October 7th. But Israel's willingness since October 7th, both in the way it has operated in Lebanon, but also throughout the region, I think suggests that there is a change in approach from this really transformative event. And I think that's being seen in the region by both friend and foe alike.
Right. So how do you think this affects the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel? We've always heard that Saudi Arabia is on the precipice of stronger diplomatic relationships with the state of Israel.
Well, we'll see. There's a deal on the table, as we all know. It has several elements. The key element of that is a defense pact of some sort with the United States, an agreement for enrichment, whether a U.S. facility on Saudi soil or a Saudi facility. And of course, something untold, but something on the Palestinians, whether this is a sort of a roadmap or what for Palestinian statehood, something that would be, I think, more than whatever the Emiratis got to their normalization agreement vis-a-vis the Palestinians. The Saudis have not moved forward with that. The Israelis, in part, haven't given anything on the Palestinian front, perhaps understandably so. Still, this deal remains on the table. It's my understanding that successive both administration and congressional figures have suggested to the Saudis that now would be the time to get this agreement. Of course, politically, it's a little difficult, after the last 9 months of what's happened in Gaza, even as Saudi Arabia has little use for Hamas. There's the humanitarian suffering. It makes it very difficult to move ahead. Nonetheless, that looks like within Congress, stars have aligned. Whether you can do that with a lame duck presidency, whether you can do that the closer we get to elections. But October 7th probably set that back a little, not only because of the Palestinian front, but because of, I think, perception of Israeli weakness. Whether how Israel has performed since then, whether it's vis-a-vis Hezbollah, whether it's their operations in Syria, Hamas, and Iran has changed that perception. We'll see. I think the coming days will be critical, but I would be a little surprised if this happens before the U.S. elections. But who knows?
Right, right. As you know, Hezbollah has 150,000 to 200,000 rockets, missiles, and drones. And since October 8th, they have been lobbying them against Israel in what has been a steady erosion of Israel's deterrence up in the north. People from Israel's north feel unsafe and secure going back to their homes. Do you feel that Lebanon or Hezbollah will be launching these missiles? And will this be just limited to Hezbollah? Or will Israel strike at Lebanon, in your estimation?
Well, yeah, I mean the key issue here obviously is the unprecedented, buffer zone between Hezbollah and Israel now located in northern Israel, and 70,000 Israelis evacuated. This is, as I said, unprecedented. Nasrallah talks about this all the time as being a great achievement of Hezbollah's onslaught starting on October 8th. And sadly, he's correct. This is something that Israel had never done before, even in the worst circumstance. In the aftermath of the killing of Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah, Nasrallah said today that we're in the new phase of the conflict, that there will be a higher intensity of the war, that Israel crossed a red line the last time that Israel had killed anybody in Dahya was Salah Ururi, a top Hamas leader, and that was back in Newark. This time, a few days ago, and Fuad Shukr was apparently visiting his girlfriend in Dahya. It's a message in support of the marital fidelity, perhaps, but violated this red line for Hezbollah. They have unlimited, basically, supplies of rockets and missiles. They have not used to date their upgraded precision guided munitions that are either GPS guided or electro-optical, that don't operate on GPS. This is something, actually, a way that Hezbollah may up the ante by starting to pull out these type of weapons in the aftermath of the Shukr assassination, or targeting Israeli cities. Haifa, Tel Aviv, also something that would be a dramatic escalation, and I think lead us down a trajectory that's very dangerous. Israel can target these weapons on the ground, but many of them will, I would imagine, tens of thousands of them will rain on Israel if the front is fully opened. The success of Iron Dome to date is that it discerns the trajectories of incoming rockets and missiles, and so it doesn't expend a counter missile battery on missiles or rockets that are going to fall on areas without civilians or strategic assets. But once you start using smart weapons, Iron Dome will be undoubtedly overwhelmed, and Israelis will be in bomb shelters for extensive periods of time. Ben Gurion will be closed. Hezbollah also has land to sea missiles. One of them, in 2006, almost sunk Israel's top missile cruiser, the Hanit, killed 12 Israeli seamen. And so there won't be a whole lot of shipping going into Haifa or Ashdod either. A serious challenge to Israel. Israel can, go after these assets, but it will not be able to suppress the entire fire. And I hope Israel is itself discerning in its operations. Hezbollah has something like 38% of Lebanon's population, give or take, is Shiite. These are Hezbollah's constituents. If you're listening to what's going on in Lebanon, the majority of Lebanese have no use for Hezbollah. It's hard to oppose Hezbollah. They kill their enemies, their critics. So, one of my best friends in Lebanon, Lokman Saleem, was murdered by Hezbollah 3 weeks after I left the last administration. But the important part is to hit strategic assets, to go after Hezbollah and its constituents, and try not to inadvertently hit people who are opposed to Hezbollah. It's going to be difficult to do. One final word on this. The United States gives about $200 million a year to the Lebanese armed forces. During his last visit to Washington, Joseph Allen, the chief of staff of the Lebanese armed forces, said that it's a possibility that the Lebanese armed forces would join the conflict if this became a full-fledged war between Israel and Lebanon. I wouldn't advise it. Not only would there would be the decimation of the Lebanese armed forces, but also an end to this. I think what has been a very productive U.S. relationship with the Lebanese armed forces in previous conflicts between Israel and the LAF. The army is stable. That I would recommend, if the worst case scenario occurs, that they do the same this time.
Great. Okay. Well, we have seen throughout the 9 to 10 months of this war, 300 days into it, that Israel has used a lot of its defensive shield. Do you think that Israel has enough of its defensive shield against what could be a massive response from Hezbollah with their 150,000 to 200,000 rockets and missiles? Will they be able to protect their population from Hezbollah, do you feel?
Well, sadly, I think the answer is no. I think if there is a full-out war, there will be Israeli civilian casualties. I think people will be in bunkers, in bomb shelters, and safe rooms for lengthy periods of time. And I think that Iron Dome and the Arrow, et cetera, potentially will be potentially overwhelmed. And that's not even to mention whether this party to this conflict, the Houthis, who just a week and a half ago fired a drone into Tel Aviv, probably at either the U.S. Embassy or the Kiryat of the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And then there's the Hashid, the Iranian-backed Iraqi militias that the U.S. hit actually earlier, maybe a week ago or 5 days ago, as they were planning to target U.S. forces in Iraq. They too will be involved. They've been sending drones toward Haifa since this conflict began as well. So no, I don't think Israel has enough. And part of the reason why Israel has been interested in a diplomatic solution, or at least a diplomatic agreement brokered by the United States with Hezbollah, to defer the conflict. I think Israel is under no illusions that any agreement would be long lasting. But some sort of agreement that would move Hezbollah's special forces, the Radwan forces, off the border, create a buffer zone in Lebanon, even if Israel had to curtail its overflights for a period of time over Lebanon. Part of the reason they want that is not only to give its soldiers, the 180,000 troops who've been at war now for 9 months nonstop, the active duty guys and women, but rather to give Israel time to replenish its stocks of JDAMs, of smart bomb kits, of 155 millimeter tank shells, of Iron Dome batteries. They have enough, but you can never have enough for what may be coming from the north.
Right. Mindy Stein wrote in and asked, how can there possibly be a diplomatic solution with Hezbollah? Which is true. The whole raison d'etre of Hezbollah is the destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And how is what Amos Hochstein is working on any different from UN Security Council Resolution 1701?
Well, that's a great question. So let me start with what Hochstein has been working on, which is essentially a deal to move the 10,000 Radwan forces off Israel's border. They are effectively off the border right now, right? Israel has been bombing these forces, their assets along the border for since October 8th. But the concern is that if there was a de-escalation of sorts, these people would move right back. And of course, Hezbollah's war plan was the same war plan that Hamas implemented on October 7th. So that's why they moved the 70,000 Israelis out of the north. Hochstein's plan is to have, and he's doing this via, for better or for worse, indirect negotiations with Hezbollah, is to have these forces move back 7 to 10 kilometers, basically the distance of line of sight of a Coronet anti-tank weapon. Is really along the border, to bring 6,000 or so Lebanese armed forces, troops to this area, to augment UNIFIL. UNIFIL is the UN interim force in Lebanon that has been interim since 1978. They were brought in under 1701, increased from about 1,800 troops to about 13 to 15,000 peacekeepers, more peacekeepers per kilometer than anywhere on the face of the earth, to ensure that Hezbollah didn't rearm after 2006. They failed, right? To be fair to them, they were being targeted by Hezbollah. Many of them were killed or harassed, beaten up, roadside bombs, etc. For a long time, it's surprising, but since 1978, this organization that was supposed to, and particularly after 2006, was supposed to, prevent the rearming of Hezbollah. Since 2006, they haven't found a single Hezbollah weapon in Lebanon. It's remarkable. So what they would do as part of this agreement is actually to augment UNIFIL, not with more troops, but with troops who are willing to actually call balls and strikes. Like the Germans, right? The French, who are part of UNIFIL right now, are reticent to call out Hezbollah. The Israelis have very little confidence in them. This would involve UNIFIL going to places that are places like Green Without Borders, so-called Green Without Borders, as well as environmental NGO military bases in South Lebanon, that they would have access all areas, not being prevented from access by the Lebanese armed forces or by Hezbollah. And in exchange for all of this, there would be a delineation of the blue line. The actual border, like 11 border points, would be delineated, probably in Lebanon's favor. And the village of Qatar, which is currently divided between Lebanon and Israel, would be unified in Lebanon. And Israel would agree, at least temporarily, to curtail its overflights of Lebanon, intelligence gathering and military missions with manned aircraft. Israel knows Hezbollah will cheat, and yet they've been at war for 9 months now. They need a break, and they need to replenish their arsenal and prepare for what will be a really challenging fight, a war like Israel has never seen before. And I perfectly understand risks in this as well. And the risk, of course, is that if you're not at war, you don't want to go to war, right? Even if you're in a war, you don't want to expand the war. I mean, there's a real reticence, and whether public opinion will change a year from now. But this is a problem, I think. Israel had the startup nation. They were booming economically, tourism, regional integration. And then, they didn't pay attention, I think, to very difficult problems that kicked the can down the road. And there may be, I don't want to say inevitability, but I think for most people on the strategic level in Israel right now, the idea of a war with Lebanon is more a matter of when, not a matter of if.
Right. Okay, we've got a number of questions about this, and it's, I think, all true. Since UN Security Council Resolution 1701, it's clear that UNIFIL has been a failure. What what makes anyone believe that any agreement with Hezbollah will be enforced? I mean, as I said before, Hezbollah's whole raison d'etre is the elimination of the state of Israel.
Correct. And actually, they don't become, in a way, they don't become any less threatening if they are pulled back 7 kilometers. Their missile arsenal, can reach everywhere in Israel, from Kiryat Shmona to Eilat and everywhere in between, and with accuracy. Drones, missiles, strategic missiles, and yes, UNIFIL has been a failure. So I was out of the government. I worked in the Pentagon. During the Bush administration, I was gone by the time we got 1701. But what 1701 did was, increase the force from 2,000 to a cap of 15,000 troops, and they have not done their job. And part of that is UNIFIL. Part of that is that the mandate itself is not under Chapter 7. They cannot enforce it militarily. They need the cooperation of the government of Lebanon, the Lebanese armed forces. During the Trump administration, I pursued an initiative with Secretary Pompeo to try and actually get UNIFIL to fulfill its mandate. That is, to not be denied access or reporting to call balls and strikes for real, and there be some accountability. And I think we almost got there. We were going to veto the renewal of the mandate, but then the Beirut port blew up, and it was bad timing. This was 4 weeks before the mandate renewal. But in general, the idea was that if these people weren't going to do their jobs, then we are going to downsize them, return them to the 1,800 people that they were prior to 2007. Frankly, I think it makes sense. Some UNIFIL, there are things about UNIFIL that Israel likes very much. One of them is the trilateral mechanism, that is routine meetings between Israeli army generals and the Lebanese armed forces generals on the border to determine points of conflict, and periodically in the days before October 7th and 8th, de-escalating small skirmishes. They also liked UNIFIL's role on the maritime, to the patrols in the Med. But yeah, this is not a successful organization, and like all UN organizations, they are self-perpetuating bureaucracies. They grow and cost more money every year, and of course, we pay for 1/4 of all the entire UN peacekeeping budget, so we pay about $125 million a year for this.
So, in reality, how distinct, really, is Hezbollah from the Lebanese armed forces? We have seen pictures of LAF soldiers giving their uniforms to Hezbollah, and we know that there's a huge Shiite presence in southern Lebanon, and there are Hezbollah weapons in the south of Lebanon. I was just on the hill with Sarit Zahavi, who's from Alma, and the people in northern Israel have really suffered tremendously from this war of attrition from Hezbollah, and we don't know how much the Lebanese armed forces has a hand in this, because let's face it, Hezbollah's the bully in the playground.
Yeah, I think, let's state from the outset, the Lebanese armed forces will never oppose Hezbollah. The last time back in the 70s, the army's made up of the 17 religious ethnic groups in Lebanon, the main ones being Sunni, Shia, Christian, Druze. And the last time it had a mid-voter ethnic group, the army basically split along sectarian lines. It's since been renewed, but it doesn't handle sensitive missions like this. But nobody believes that it would maintain its integrity. So, I mean, that's first. The military has and does deconflict with Hezbollah, collaborate. It worked well fighting ISIS. The military provided artillery support for Hezbollah on the ground using American provided artillery shells. This is really something that's incredibly problematic. But the LAF does fight Sunni extremists. It doesn't fight Shiite terrorists. And so this is, the nature of the beast. On the other hand, the LAF does not give, and I've not seen the reports of equipment being provided or uniforms being provided to Hezbollah. There's no US weapons that are disappearing and going to Hezbollah. For better or for worse, Hezbollah has its own highly advanced arsenal and doesn't need US made equipment from the LAF, and that equipment does not leak. But I think we have to have, limited expectation of what the LAF can and will do, but they are not Hezbollah. They don't equal Hezbollah. Now, there are smart people out there, Tony Badran and others, who argue that we shouldn't be giving them any money, that they are a disaster. I would argue that the 200 million or so that we provide to the LAF is useful. It's a decimal point in terms of what we give. They're not a threat to the IDF. They are a domestic security organization, Sunni counterterrorism organization. It provides its visibility into the Lebanese armed forces. We can weigh in on certain issues within the LAF. And this is not another country that is infiltrated by China and Russia. And so, there is some utility to our funding for this organization, even if it is by far imperfect.
Do you have any idea when the Iron Beam will be deployed? And would that be a game changer?
Not soon enough. This has been in development for decades. The Israelis had a joint research program with the United States called the MFEL, the mobile tactical high energy laser. We did a lot of work with the Israelis in developing this. It never came to fruition. And my understanding is the Israelis are coming closer. This is obviously something that is long overdue. Just the finances of this war, of the enemy, able to fight this ongoing war of economic attrition against Israel. It is a $5,000 drone versus a $50,000 dome missile. Shooting it down. The economics of this don't make sense. Likewise, the Houthis sending a $15,000-$20,000 Scud that takes a $1 million arrow missile to shoot down. And if this is an ongoing conflict, the costs are just enormous. But the chemical laser, while just a great idea and very beneficial potentially, has limitations. It's raining. If it's cloudy, the laser beam is obstructed. This is not a panacea. This is something that would be helpful, but it's not a solution. Israel's adversaries, particularly Iran, needs to pay a cost. Iran will fight to the last Arab against Israel. I think you really have to set Iran back, make them pay a cost for what they're doing. This is one part of the problem here.
Right. So you spoke about having Iran being set back, the head of the octopus. These are just the tentacles. Iran, the mullahs and Khamenei doesn't have the courage to use their own fighters. I was in Israel the night of April 13th or April 14th in America when we were attacked with over 300 missiles and drones. How likely do you think there will be a coalition again with the United States and Jordan and possibly others to protect Israel if Iran does decide to attack?
Well, this was April 13th, April 14th was, I think, a very successful sort of test case for regional missile defense. The benefits to Israel and the potential benefits to these other countries of vis-a-vis the Iranian threat. I don't think in the capitals of these countries there was any mourning going on for Ismael Haniya. But whether politically, whether it's more difficult for them to play that type of role right now, or whether, like last time, I think we have to point out that what happened last time was in many ways um, a public relations performative effort by Iran. They gave us 5 days notice before they attacked. It'd be harder to get all this together, all the assets in place, all the coordination, if we aren't given due warning. I hope we're putting that together right now, but I think it's, as I think point out correctly, it's politically a little bit more difficult. After Israel did this on Iranian soil against this guy who on the street in the region is a lot more popular than the capital, in the halls of power of the capitals.
So, how likely do you think it is that Iran might attack Israel now?
Well, in the aftermath of, uh, so there was the attack on what was called or described as the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killed a senior IRGC commander. In the aftermath of this, we had the April 13th, 14th attack against Israel. Iran made a statement at the time saying that any attacks on Iranian personnel, its interests, would be met with a direct response from Iran. That was the statement they gave at the time. And we should remember, it wasn't just the other day that Israel killed Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Ismael Haniya, the Hamas guy in Tehran. They got the trifecta. They killed this guy, Mohammad Reza Zehdi, who was a senior IRG official in Damascus as well the same day. Let's not forget. But this will, I think, fit the parameters of Iranian interests, senior personnel, and particularly hitting on Iranian soil once again. Incredibly embarrassing for the host to lose the guest in the most protected area of Tehran. So I would expect there will be some sort of direct Iranian response, whether from Iranian soil or other Iranian assets in the region, but Iran, not the proxies.
Do you think, with what is going on in the White House today, that the United States will come in and protect Israel right now?
Well, we heard from Lloyd Austin that if Hezbollah retaliated, that the United States would stand by Israel. And I think, I know there's a lot of critics of the Biden administration out there in the pro-Israel community, but I think, for the vast majority of this very difficult time, the administration has been excellent in terms of its support for Israel, and particularly in terms of missile defense and what they did on, on April 14th. So that the administration does, what is appropriate and what is necessary.
Right, right. And I should say, we just heard from Kamala Harris yesterday saying Israel has every right to defend itself against Hezbollah. Um, so that is something positive, let's hope. Okay. And in the last couple of days ahead of a Shiite a head Shiite mullah in Lebanon publicly stated that if there is a war, Nasrallah will be responsible for the destruction of Lebanon. Do you think there's a major segment? This is from Jacob Frank. Do you think there's a major segment of the Shiite population in Lebanon that might affect Nasrallah's warlike actions? And also, Barry Werner said if Israel goes to war with Hezbollah, will the Druze or Christians or other minorities of Lebanon attack Hezbollah from the rear?
So the first part of that, Shiites against war, against Hezbollah. I believe that statement was made by Ali Amin, who I've met before, a very impressive individual cleric, anti-Hezbollah, against the Vilayat Faqih, against the melding of religious and political life. Great guy, representative of a very small, unfortunately, very small segment of the Shiite community, in Lebanon. He has been, very outspoken. And there are a handful of people, several dozen, who have gotten together publicly and have said these are Shiites against war. And they are similar to many people in other communities, among Druze, Christian, Sunni, who resent the fact that Lebanon is not a sovereign country, that the decisions of war and peace do not lie in the hands of the prime minister, but rather in the hands of Hezbollah. And in fact, Prime Minister Mikati himself said this, right? I'm not the sovereign decision maker in this country, not the decider. But so these groups exist, and there are many people, a majority, I think, 50-60% of Lebanese are don't want a war. But there is, for better or for worse, community solidarity, in part because Lebanon has been sort of in the midst of a financial crisis. For the past 4 or 5 years, the currency's devaluated 99%. There are some 80% of Lebanese below the poverty line. You're dependent more on your community when things get tough. People, go back to their primordial roots. And so, the Hezbollah has not tolerated a great deal of diverse opinions within the Shia community. There are times when they've accepted more. Now they're not trucking with it very much. Other groups have complained. I'll put aside Walid Jumlat, the head of the Druze community in Lebanon for the time being. He's outspoken supporter of the Palestinian cause. As for the Lebanese, I'd say overall the Lebanese, love the Palestinian cause, but by and large they hate the Palestinians. Drove them to civil war, in the 1970s, and they really want to get all the 180,000 Palestinians in their country to send them somewhere else and view them as a source of tremendous problems. But even as there is this sort of support for Gazan Palestinians or Palestinians writ large, a lot of Lebanese are bristling under this kind of move toward war. But even as Hezbollah has been taken on skirmishes periodically, I'm thinking about a year ago with the Lebanese forces led by Samir Jaja, I don't think we're going to see a rear guard action against Hezbollah. That, like 2006, I don't think that there will be a rally around Hezbollah effect. And part of that is not only that people are upset the country's already in ruin and they don't want to see it destroyed like 2006, but also we should remember since 2006, we had the Syrian civil war in 2011 until today. And Hezbollah was a participant in that civil war and helped the Assad regime and Iran kill nearly 500,000 Syrians, mostly Sunni Muslims. So there's not a whole lot of support in many segments of the community for Hezbollah these days.
Right. Okay, we have just about reached our time limit. I really want to thank David Shanker of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy for his generous time. We would really, we need at EMET really do welcome your support. If you like these sorts of webinars, which we do every single week, and are on Capitol Hill every single week, almost every single day, meeting with members of Congress to try to move the bar just a little bit towards empathy of what the state of Israel is up against, which we see as the defender of Western civilization against Islamic jihadism. We, welcome your support. So please join us next Wednesday at 12 noon, where we will have another riveting AMET webinar. Thank you so much, David, for your generous time and support. It's very illuminating.
Thanks, Sarah. It's good to be with you. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, bye-bye.